It started with screaming, sharp, terrified, high-pitched, and I knew immediately it was Ava. I dropped the grocery bag in my arms and sprinted toward the sound, heart crashing against my ribs, panic flooding every inch of me. The sun was blinding, the parking lot already buzzing with neighbors watching something unfold. That's when I saw it. My daughter's wheelchair van tilted halfway into the air, a tow truck's hydraulic lift raising it inch by inch off the ground, and she was still in it. Through the tinted windows, I could see her tiny hands slapping the glass, her mouth wide open in a scream that would haunt me for the rest of my life. She was strapped into her wheelchair in the back, helpless, terrified, the harness locking her in place while the van rocked like a coffin being pried from the earth. I ran toward her, screaming louder than I ever had, waving my arms, begging the driver to stop. She's inside. My daughter is inside. Stop. But the engine kept revving. The truck kept rising. And then I saw her, Karen. HOA badge on her chest like a sheriff, phone in hand, calmly recording the scene from the sidewalk. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She just stood there with her arms folded, watching my daughter being lifted like property. She shouldn't have been parked there, she said coldly when I screamed her name. That spot is for authorized residents only. I was shaking so violently I could barely see straight. She's disabled. That's a wheelchair-accessible van with an ADA permit. I cried, but Karen didn't care. Rules are rules, she shrugged and kept filming. One of the workers finally noticed my daughter's face through the glass and shouted, "Panic to the driver." The truck jerked to a stop just as the front wheels lifted clear off the ground. Ava was crying now, sobbing, gasping, pounding on the window like she was drowning. A neighbor ran forward and helped me pry the van door open. I scrambled inside and unstrapped her with shaking hands, whispering, "Mommy's here, baby. I've got you. You're okay. I've got you." But she wasn't okay. Her body trembled, her voice cracked, and her eyes looked at me like I had let the world swallow her whole. All because Karen decided our van didn't fit her vision of order. All because she called a tow truck on a child who couldn't even walk and watched like it was just another chore to check off her list. That was the day I realized Karen wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous. And if I didn't stop her, no one would. I never wanted more than what most mothers want, a place to raise my daughter in peace where the sidewalks were smooth, the neighbors smiled, and my child could feel like she belonged, even if the world wasn't built for her. Ava was born with muscular dystrophy, and by the time she turned 4, she relied on a power wheelchair to move more than a few steps. But she never once let it dull her spirit. She sang constantly, off-key, too loud, joyfully. She loved painting rainbows on the inside of the van windows, naming the squirrels outside our door, and waving at strangers like every single one was her best friend. For years, we lived in cramped apartments with broken elevators and narrow doorways. I used to lift her in and out of the car by hand, but as she grew and as her medical needs became more complex, we finally qualified for a wheelchair-accessible van through a local assistance program. That van became more than a vehicle, it was freedom. It had an electric lift, a secure docking system, extra-wide doors. It was big, sure, and it took up space, but it allowed Ava to leave the house without fear. We installed our official ADA placard on the rearview mirror, had the license plate tagged appropriately, and followed every regulation by the book. Still, I worried about where we parked, about whether people would understand, whether they'd see her, not just the van. So, when we finally got accepted into a quiet suburban neighborhood through a housing support program, I thought we were stepping into a new chapter, one where Ava would be safe, welcomed, maybe even accepted. The houses were clean, the sidewalks wide and accessible. There was a small community park and even a garden trail. It looked like the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where neighbors helped each other bring in groceries. The HOA brochure we were given talked about upholding community standards and protecting property values, but I didn't read too much into it at first. We were just grateful to have a ground floor unit with a ramp and our own assigned disabled parking space directly in front of the house. I remember the first day we pulled up in the van, Ava in her rainbow helmet, clutching her favorite plush turtle, and she said, "It looks like a castle, Mommy." I smiled. It wasn't a castle, but it felt like one. For the first few days, things were quiet. A few neighbors waved. One woman brought over a pie. Ava started drawing with sidewalk chalk again, giggling at the birds, rolling over every inch of our tiny front patio like she was exploring a whole new world. I thought we'd finally found our place. But the first letter from the HOA came within a week. It said our van exceeded the visual uniformity of the neighborhood and requested we limit extended vehicle presence in visible parking areas. I called the office, confused, thinking there had been a mistake. "We have a valid disability placard," I explained. "The van is legally registered, parked in a designated space. It's for my daughter." The woman on the phone hesitated, then gave me a tight, rehearsed answer. "We're simply responding to a community concern. We encourage all residents to find alternative storage if possible to preserve neighborhood aesthetics." That phrase, neighborhood aesthetics, burned into my brain. What they really meant was, "Your daughter's van makes people uncomfortable." I wanted to scream, but instead, I filed a written response, cited ADA guidelines, and kept every piece of correspondence. I started watching my back. That's when we met Karen. At first, she seemed polite enough. She stopped me one morning as I was unloading groceries and said, "That's quite a large vehicle. Are you planning to leave it there all the time?" I told her about Ava, about the need for close access. She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. "Of course," she said sweetly, "but we have to think about how things appear. Some of the board members have expressed concern about the van being prominently placed." She gestured to it like it was a garbage bin left on the front lawn. I tried to stay calm. I explained that we had clearance, that we were following all regulations. She nodded, but her eyes were already cold. "Just something to think about," she said. From that moment on, I knew she was watching us. The letters increased. So did the stares. Ava didn't notice, she was too busy living. But I felt it, the undercurrent of judgment, of disapproval, of a community that had welcomed us with a smile, and then turned its back the second we took up space. I started checking the van every morning for scratches. I kept logs. I even started parking it closer to the edge of the space to blend in, but it was never enough. Because this wasn't about a vehicle. It was about people like Karen who believe that rules exist not to protect a community, but to control who gets to feel like they're part of it. And as I'd soon learn, Karen was just getting started. Karen introduced herself the way snakes do, quietly, calmly, and with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She caught me outside one morning as I was unloading Ava's school supplies from the van, clipboard in hand, like she was on some official business. "You must be Rachel," she said brightly, her tone as sugary as it was sharp. "I'm Karen, head of the HOA. Just wanted to formally welcome you to the neighborhood." Her smile tightened when she glanced at the van. "That's quite a vehicle. Is it yours?" I smiled, a bit cautious, but trying to be polite. "Yes, it's for my daughter. She uses a wheelchair, and the van's fitted with a lift and secure docking system." Karen nodded, but her eyes didn't soften. Instead, she took a step closer and added, "I figured as much. Some of the board members have mentioned it. It's, well, just a little large for the street, no? Not exactly in line with the neighborhood's overall feel." She gestured vaguely toward the other vehicles parked nearby. Sleek sedans, spotless SUVs, none of them modified or oversized. I forced a smile. "It's legally parked, and we have a disabled placard. We've checked all the regulations." Karen didn't miss a beat. Of course," she said, waving her hand like that was beside the point. "It's just, we like to keep things looking cohesive. It's about curb appeal, really." And with that, she turned and walked away, her words sticking like burrs in my brain. From that day forward, Karen's smile became a warning sign. She always smiled, but never with warmth. She waved at other neighbors and brought cookies to HOA meetings, but with me, every interaction came laced with something colder. She began lingering near our driveway when I pulled in, pretending to be out for a walk. Once she stopped Ava and me as we were unloading art supplies and said, "Oh, so creative. Just be careful not to make a mess on the sidewalk." We had a child spill paint last year, and it really ruined the look of the block. Her voice was light, but her gaze zeroed in on the rainbow chalk drawings Ava had proudly left near our front steps. She began mentioning rules more frequently, sometimes in passing, sometimes in formal letters. One day, I received an email stating that our van violated the spirit of the community's visual harmony and suggesting we consider parking it in a less visible location, perhaps a nearby lot. I nearly laughed. A less visible location? For my daughter's mobility van, we needed it close, accessible. That was the point. I wrote back with citations, ADA regulations, everything I could think of. Their response? We understand your concerns, but must also balance the needs of all residents. The balance, it seemed, always tipped away from us. And Karen? She kept escalating. She once took photos of our van and emailed them to other HOA members. At least, that's what a sympathetic neighbor whispered to me later. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. Documentation is part of my duty, she said, lips curling into a mockery of a smile. If it were up to me, I'd have everyone treated equally. That includes residents with special situations. She said it slowly, as if Ava's existence was a condition to tolerate, not a child to protect. I felt heat rise in my face, but I stayed calm. We're not asking for special treatment. I said, we're asking for the bare minimum, a legal space, and some human decency. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. Of course, she said again, then added, we all just have to follow the same rules. That's all I'm saying. But it wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. With every smile, every passive-aggressive comment, every email CCNG board members about our vehicle, Karen made it clear she didn't want us here. She saw our van, our ramp, our very presence as disruption. As a threat to the polished, curated image of the neighborhood, she ruled like a self-appointed queen. And worst of all, she wasn't shouting. She was whispering, smiling, weaponizing civility to destroy us one letter, one complaint, one icy glance at a time. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before she went from smiles to something far more dangerous. Because people like Karen don't stop at words when they think they have the rules on their side. The first official warning came folded into a white envelope slipped under our door, printed on glossy HOA letterhead with cold, clinical language that read more like a threat than a notice. It stated that our wheelchair-accessible van was in possible violation of Section 7B of the HOA guidelines regarding unauthorized extended parking in designated zones. I blinked at it, stunned, rereading the words as Ava sat beside me coloring, unaware that someone was trying to erase her independence one letter at a time. The accusation was laughable. We had an ADA placard clearly displayed on the mirror, and the van was legally parked in the space directly in front of our home, a space marked with the blue disabled symbol. There were no time restrictions posted, no signage saying how long a vehicle could be in that spot. But that didn't seem to matter. I called the HOA office immediately confused and angry, and was met with a calm but hollow voice. A resident submitted a complaint. We're required to follow up. When I asked what the violation was, they repeated the phrase like a script, unauthorized long-term parking. When I asked who submitted it, they refused to say, anonymous, of course, but I didn't need a name. Karen's shadow was all over it. What followed felt like a slow, crushing avalanche of paper and policy. Week after week, more warnings arrived, each one slightly more forceful than the last. The language escalated from possible infraction to repeated failure to comply, and eventually to final notice before fines and further action. The absurdity of it was maddening. I responded to every notice in writing, attaching photos of the placard, of Ava exiting the van, and a log showing that the vehicle was in regular use, because of course it was. My daughter went to school, therapy, doctor appointments. She didn't live in the van. She lived because of it. I even offered to meet with the board to explain everything in person, face to face. No one replied. One day, after returning from a speech therapy session, I parked in our assigned spot and began unloading groceries while Ava waited in the van, playing with her tablet. I took maybe 5 minutes inside. When I returned, Karen was standing at the curb, arms crossed, phone in hand, staring at the van like it was a crime scene. "You can't leave that thing there all day," she snapped. I stood in stunned silence, then gestured to Ava through the window. "She's inside. I'm unloading food. It's been 10 minutes. Karen didn't blink. "It's not about you," she said. "Other residents have concerns. You're making the lot look cluttered. It's inconsiderate." I clenched my fists. "It's a disability van. If you have an issue, take it up with the law." She raised her eyebrows, lips curled into that infuriating smile. "We have rules. The ADA doesn't override HOA policies. Maybe next time you could be more discreet." Discreet, like Ava's wheelchair was an eyesore. Like her van was shameful. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, wondering how long it would take for Karen to push this beyond words. Within days, a bright orange parking violation sticker appeared on the van windshield. I ripped it off with shaking hands, furious. This time I took it straight to the HOA office, demanding a formal meeting. I brought all my documentation, photos, letters, recordings. I quoted federal accessibility laws. The woman behind the desk barely looked up from her keyboard. "You'll need to speak with the board," she said. "We can submit a review request." I submitted it. No meeting ever happened. No one contacted me. But the threats continued. At one point, they claimed the van was oversized and posed aesthetic concerns. Another notice accused us of vehicle storage, implying we were using it like a junkyard car. I took a video that day, showing Ava getting in and out, laughing, using the van's ramp like it was a carnival ride. I posted it online. It went mostly unnoticed then, but it would matter later. Karen's attacks became more strategic. She began emailing the board directly, citing fabricated observations like van left unattended for over 48 hours or child playing inside vehicle for hours unattended. She painted a picture of neglect, of misuse, of some violation of the invisible social order she believed gave her power. She even accused me of weaponizing disability for sympathy. Those were her exact words. "This isn't about the child," she wrote in one message I later obtained. "It's about abuse of community resources." Ava wasn't a child to her. She was a problem, a disruption, a target. I tried to talk to neighbors. A few nodded sympathetically. Some muttered, "I'm so sorry," and quickly walked away. One told me quietly she's been like this for years, but no one ever pushes back. That's when I realized Karen thrived in silence. She built her power not through rage, but through exhaustion. She wore people down until they stopped fighting, but I wasn't stopping. Not this time. Because the next step she took, the one I never saw coming, wasn't just about control. It was about cruelty, and it nearly destroyed us. It was supposed to be a normal afternoon, quiet, uneventful. Ava and I had just returned from her occupational therapy appointment, and I parked the van in our usual spot, the one clearly marked with the blue disabled icon that Karen pretended not to see. Ava was exhausted, her head resting against the seatbelt, clutching her stuffed turtle as she waited for me to unload the groceries before helping her out. She asked if she could stay in the van for a minute, and I said yes. The engine was off, the windows cracked, and the air conditioning had cooled it enough to keep her comfortable. I shut the front door behind me, planning to be back outside in less than 2 minutes, but in that window of time, barely a sliver of a moment, Karen struck. I didn't hear the tow truck at first. I only heard Ava scream. It was a scream I'd never heard from her before. Shrill, panicked, primal. I dropped the milk, the bags spilling across the tile, and sprinted outside barefoot, heart pounding in my throat. What I saw nearly made me collapse. A massive tow truck had reversed up to our van, its engine rumbling, its lift engaged. The driver, a man in a yellow vest, was crouched beside the tires, fastening chains. Ava was inside, trapped, her hands pressed against the window, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mommy," she shrieked. "Help me. It's moving." I lost my mind. I sprinted to the truck, screaming, "Stop. My daughter is inside." She's in the van." The driver looked up, startled. "What?" He yelled back, eyes darting to the back seat window. But before he could react, Karen appeared like a ghost from behind the hedges, arms folded, lips pursed in satisfaction. "She had more than enough warnings," she said coolly. "The vehicle's in violation. It's already been reported multiple times." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "She's inside. You called a tow while a disabled child, was in the van?" Karen didn't flinch. "The driver didn't know she was there. That's on you. Maybe don't leave your child unattended in public property." "Public property?" My legs nearly buckled from rage. "That is my driveway," I said. "That is her medical transport van. We have legal documentation, and you knew she was in there." She didn't deny it. She just shrugged and looked at the driver, who now stood frozen, visibly shaken. "Is she secure?" he asked. I didn't wait for his decision. I ran to the side door, yanked it open, climbed into the van, and began unfastening Ava's harness with trembling fingers. She was sobbing, her whole body trembling, unable to speak through the panic. "You're okay," I whispered. "Mommy's here. I've got you." Her cheeks were soaked. Her hands were shaking. She kept whispering, "Why did she do that? Why did she do that?" I carried her out of the van as the tow truck idled awkwardly beside us. The driver scratched his head, apologizing over and over, insisting he had no idea there was someone inside. "I was just told it was abandoned," he muttered. "Lady said it hadn't moved in days." I didn't check. Days? We'd used the van that morning. Another lie. Another calculated strike. I sat on the curb with Ava in my lap, trying to calm her down, while neighbors began to gather, drawn by the shouting. Some gasped when they realized what had happened. One woman ran back inside to call the police. Karen remained rooted in place, still pretending she'd done nothing wrong. "I was just enforcing the rules," she said to no one in particular. "That's what the HOA is for." The tow truck eventually pulled away without the van, and an officer arrived shortly after. I told him everything, shaking, holding Ava tightly. He looked stunned, even horrified, but when he asked Karen for her side, she simply pointed to the warning notices and shrugged. "She's been warned," she repeated. "I didn't know the child was in the vehicle." Another lie. I had seen her. She had watched Ava climb into that van 20 minutes earlier. The police took statements, but no one was arrested. No one was charged. The tow truck company promised it would never happen again. But none of that mattered to Ava. For the next week, she refused to get back into the van. She cried every time we pulled into the driveway. She asked me to check the windows every hour just in case someone tries to take it again. My daughter, the little girl who once sang Disney songs at full volume from the back seat, now sat in silence, gripping her seatbelt with white knuckles. Karen hadn't just targeted our vehicle. She had targeted her dignity, her safety, her very sense of belonging. And she had done it with a smile, hidden behind rules, protected by the HOA. But I wasn't going to let this go. She had gone too far. And now I was done being afraid. It was time for Karen to face consequences, not just for what she did to a van, but for what she tried to do to my child. The flashing red and blue lights were still reflecting off the windows when the second police car arrived, adding another layer of noise and confusion to the already surreal scene. Ava clung to me, her fingers wrapped around the collar of my shirt, like she was afraid I might vanish too, her body trembling so hard I could feel it in my bones. I tried to keep her calm, whispering soothing words, but I could barely hold myself together. My voice was shaking. My heart hadn't stopped racing since I had yanked open that van door and pulled her out of what could have been a rolling prison. One officer spoke to the tow truck driver, while another tried to talk to me, but I couldn't focus on anything except Ava's quiet sobs and the way her eyes kept darting toward the spot where the tow truck had been, like she was checking to make sure it wouldn't come back. The driver kept repeating the same thing. I didn't know. No one said anything about a child being inside. I was just following orders. I was told it was an unauthorized vehicle left idle too long. I turned toward Karen, who stood off to the side with her arms crossed and an infuriating look of feigned concern on her face. She didn't approach. She didn't apologize. She just watched, cool and expressionless, as if she were observing some unfortunate scene that had nothing to do with her. When the officer questioned her directly, she played her part like a pro. I made the call, yes, she admitted. The vehicle had been in violation multiple times. I never knew there was a child inside. I assumed it was unoccupied. I was simply acting within my role as HOA president. Her tone was even, rehearsed, emotionless. The officer asked if she had seen Ava in the van earlier, and Karen shook her head without blinking. No, she said simply. I didn't. It was a lie. I had seen her standing there when we pulled in. I had seen her glance toward the van when I got out. But without footage, without someone willing to speak up, it was my word against hers. One of the officers nodded slowly, turned back to me, and gently explained that while the situation was disturbing, there had technically been no crime committed, no injury, no documented threat. We're going to file a report, he said, but it may be considered a civil matter, not criminal. I wanted to scream. My daughter had been nearly hauled away in a tow truck, strapped into a wheelchair, vulnerable, trapped, and the best they could offer me was a form and a half-hearted promise to look into it. The next day, the HOA sent a letter, not a phone call, not a knock at the door, but a printed memo folded into our mailbox like it was just another notice about lawn care. It read, due to recent events involving the removal of an unpermitted vehicle, the HOA wishes to clarify that all actions taken were within procedural bounds. We regret any distress caused to residents. Please be reminded that HOA guidelines must be followed at all times to preserve community standards. Distress? My daughter had been nearly kidnapped by negligence, traumatized by a system that viewed her as nothing more than an inconvenience, and they called it distress? There was no mention of Ava, no mention of Karen, no accountability, just the word procedure. As if it were a shield they could hide behind forever. Ava didn't leave the house for 3 days. She didn't want to. She wouldn't even sit near the front window. At night, she clung to me and asked if the truck lady would come back. I told her no. I told her we were safe. But I didn't believe it. Because as long as Karen lived across the street, as long as the HOA backed her with their passive policies and faceless letters, we weren't safe. We were targets. I called lawyers. I called advocates. I called every disability rights group I could find. I had stayed silent long enough. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was trauma. This was psychological abuse. And if no one else was going to stop Karen, then I was. I didn't care how many rules she hid behind. I was going to pull the whole system into the light and show the world exactly what procedure looks like when it destroys a child's peace. Something inside me hardened after that day, after watching my daughter sob in the backseat of a van that nearly became her prison, while Karen watched like she was the one being wronged. I was done asking nicely. I was done filing polite letters, hoping the system that failed us would suddenly grow a conscience. I wanted truth. I wanted proof. I wanted justice. The next morning, I began gathering everything I could, every document, every email, every notice we had ever received. I created a timeline with exact dates, showing how the harassment escalated from vague warnings to official letters to that moment in the driveway where my daughter's life was nearly upended because someone decided her existence was too much. I requested a copy of the police report. I called the towing company, demanded the dispatch logs, and was stunned, but not surprised when they confirmed Karen had personally called to report the van. She had claimed it was abandoned, non-compliant, and a visual nuisance to the neighborhood. There was no mention, none, that a child might be inside. I asked the dispatcher if that mattered. She paused and said, "Ma'am, if we had known there was someone in the vehicle, we would never have authorized the pickup." That was it. That sentence. That was the moment I knew we had her. Not just morally, legally. I filed a request for any available security footage from our street. Most of the HOA-installed cameras were pointed at common areas, but I managed to get clips from a neighbor 3 houses down, an older man who had been quiet for months, but saw the incident and reached out to me privately after it happened. "I think what happened was wrong," he told me, "and I think you should have this." His doorbell camera had caught Karen standing across the street just minutes before the tow truck arrived, watching us unload, clearly seeing Ava inside the van. You could even hear her mutter, "Finally," as the truck pulled in. She had waited for it, timed it, watched my daughter get into the van, then made the call and waited for the chaos to unfold like it was entertainment. I broke down watching it, but I also felt something else for the first time in weeks: power. I took everything to a lawyer. Her name was Felicia, and within 5 minutes of reviewing the footage and reading the tow report, she looked at me and said, "This isn't just a civil issue. This is deliberate endangerment. You have a case." We filed suit against both Karen and the HOA, Karen for negligence, harassment, and willful endangerment of a disabled minor, and the HOA for failure to protect, institutional negligence, and repeated violations of the Fair Housing Act. The ADA specialist Felicia worked with called it one of the worst cases she'd seen of weaponized procedure against a disabled child. The case gained traction quickly, especially after I shared the story online, posting Ava's story on a disability rights forum and tagging advocacy groups. The video from a neighbor's camera went viral within 2 days. Thousands of people were suddenly watching what Karen had done, standing still, arms folded, as a little girl was nearly towed away in terror. They saw Ava's face through the glass, her tiny hands banging the window. They saw me running barefoot in panic. They saw Karen do nothing. Disability advocates and legal aid foundations reached out almost immediately. One group filed an amicus brief supporting our case, and several offered to fund public awareness campaigns. A journalist who specialized in ADA violations contacted me for an interview. Within a week, our story had been picked up by 3 major news outlets. Karen went from being a silent tyrant on a suburban street to a national headline. Reporters started calling the HOA office. Residents were questioned. Some of the neighbors who had once stayed silent now came forward. One young woman confided, "Karen told me she was going to get rid of that eyesore of a van. I didn't know she meant like that." The weight of silence was finally cracking. As we prepared for court, Felicia showed me a side-by-side comparison of HOA complaints from other residents. No other family had received more than 2 warnings in a year. We had 15 in 6 months. Every single one was either written by Karen or someone she had convinced to file on her behalf. She had created a paper trail designed to look like a pattern of noncompliance, but we had the receipts, we had the footage, we had Ava's voice, and for the first time, they had to answer for it. This wasn't just about us anymore. This was about every family who's ever been made to feel like they didn't belong because someone in power decided they were inconvenient. This was for every mother who's ever had to choose between keeping the peace and defending her child's right to exist. And this was only the beginning. The courtroom was cold, quiet, and heavy with the weight of everything we had carried for months: fear, anger, humiliation, trauma. Karen sat at the opposite table in a pressed beige suit, her face unreadable behind carefully applied makeup and the performative grace of someone used to controlling every room she walked into. But this time, she wasn't running the meeting. This wasn't her HOA boardroom. This was a court of law, and every smug glance, every denial, every whispered lie she had fed the neighborhood for months was finally being dragged into the light. My attorney, Felicia, presented our case with surgical precision. She opened with the video footage, Karen watching from the sidewalk, visible in the background as Ava was loaded into the van as I walked away, as the tow truck pulled in moments later. The courtroom gasped when they heard the audio, Karen muttering finally as the truck arrived. Then came the documentation, the timeline of complaints, the pattern of harassment, the false report to the towing company, the refusal to acknowledge the ADA guidelines despite repeated requests. The judge leaned forward during the recording of the tow company dispatcher saying, "If we knew a child was inside, we would have never touched that vehicle." By the time Felicia was done laying it all out, there was no room for doubt. Karen hadn't made a mistake. She had orchestrated an act of cruelty with intent. Karen's lawyer tried to spin it, calling it a misunderstanding, a series of unfortunate events, a lapse in communication. They painted Karen as a well-meaning community member, simply trying to uphold neighborhood standards. But that narrative shattered the moment Ava took the stand. She was nervous, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but her voice, soft, sweet, and clear, filled the courtroom like thunder. She told them what she remembered. Sitting in her van, waiting for me when the truck arrived, the moment it started shaking, the sound of chains, the fear that no one would hear her. She said, "I thought I was being taken away. I thought I was being punished because of my chair." There wasn't a dry eye in the room, not even among the jury. Karen refused to look at her. Then came the HOA's turn. They tried to distance themselves from Karen, claiming they had no knowledge of the specifics, that they simply acted on reports, that their policies had room for improvement. But Felicia wasn't having it. She showed how the HOA had ignored ADA protections, failed to investigate Karen's misconduct, and allowed her to operate unchecked while multiple residents expressed concern. One email even showed a board member warning Karen that her behavior was approaching harassment, which she dismissed with, "The board trusts me to maintain our standards." That single line destroyed whatever defense they had left. When the verdict was delivered, I barely heard the words, just the feeling that swept through my body like breaking a surface after drowning. Guilty of harassment, guilty of endangerment, guilty of civil rights violations. The court awarded us damages for emotional trauma, legal costs, and ordered the HOA to revise its bylaws under ADA oversight. Karen was removed from the board effective immediately and barred from participating in any HOA leadership anywhere in the state. But the real victory wasn't the money or even the policy changes. It was the look on Ava's face when we walked out of that courtroom. Head high, hands in mine, her smile returning for the first time in weeks. We had faced down a system built to silence us. And we hadn't just survived, we'd won. Karen was gone. Just like that, the woman who had ruled our lives with passive-aggressive smiles and weaponized rules was stripped of her title, her influence, and the false dignity she had clung to like armor. But even after the courtroom emptied, after the papers were signed and the headlines faded, her shadow lingered. Healing doesn't come with a gavel. It comes slowly, in quiet mornings and shaky breaths, in the way Ava would still flinch at the sound of trucks or clutch my hand tighter every time we pulled into a new parking space, even if it was safe, even if it was ours. But day by day, things changed. Ava started to smile again, not the polite, guarded one she'd worn after the incident, but her real smile. The kind that curled up at the corners and lit up her whole face. She went back to singing in the van, asking to play her favorite road trip songs, making up silly stories about the clouds as we drove. The wheelchair ramp we had fought to keep now felt like a monument, like a flag planted on a battlefield we refused to surrender. And though we had won, we knew we could never stay there. That neighborhood wasn't our home. It never had been. So we moved not out of fear, but out of choice. We found a new community with no HOA, no board meetings, no Karen and khaki. Just open space, wide sidewalks, and neighbors who saw my daughter not as a disruption, but as a child. And this time, I didn't just unpack boxes, I unpacked truth. I shared our story online, in local town halls, with advocacy groups. I started getting messages from people across the country, single moms, veterans, families with disabled children who had faced the same kind of quiet cruelty hidden behind policy. That's when I knew this wasn't just our story. It was the story of so many others who had been shamed, silenced, fined, or pushed out for the crime of existing outside the mold. So I kept speaking. We built something new. The HOA stories became a place where others could speak too. Ava helped me design the logo. Her idea was to make the a wheelchair wheel. She said, "If other kids are scared, maybe this will help them be brave." And she was right. We get stronger with every story. And no matter what neighborhood we're in, I will never again apologize for taking up space. Karen tried to break us. She tried to humiliate my daughter, erase her voice, tow her away like trash. But all she did was teach me how dangerous silence is and how unstoppable we become when we rise. No one will ever hurt my child like that again. And if they try, They'll find out exactly how loud a mother can be when she refuses to be ignored. If you've watched this far, you know this isn't just about one little girl or one cruel woman with too much power. This is about something bigger, about systems that allow cruelty to hide behind clipboards, policies, and so called community standards. It's about the Karens of the world who smile while they hurt people who enforce rules not to protect, but to punish. My daughter was nearly towed away, like forgotten furniture, and the HOA tried to bury it under paperwork and silence. But we didn't let them. We fought back. We exposed the truth. And now we speak up not just for ourselves, but for you. If you've ever been threatened with fines, falsely accused, or made to feel like your family didn't belong because of a wheelchair, a service dog, a cultural tradition, or just because you were different, you are not alone. You matter. Your story matters. And that's why I created this channel, the HOA Stories. This is where we tell the truth about what really happens behind the perfect fences and pristine driveways. This is where victims become voices. So, if you've been silenced, share your story in the comments. If this story made your blood boil or brought you to tears, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe. Because we are building something bigger than one HOA. We are building a community of truth tellers, a place where power doesn't protect cruelty and no child is ever treated like an inconvenience again. This is the HOA Stories. And we're not going anywhere. We're louder now. We're stronger. And we are just getting started.